So welcome everyone. My name is Lori Fisher. I'm Executive Assistant with Southern First Nation Secretariat. Thank you for taking time out of your morning to join us. So today's our first session of a four-part series of cybersecurity awareness training with Tom Bigos. SFNS is actually we've known Tom for a few years now. He's done a security assessment of our network, and he also comes in person to do cybersecurity training with our staff. So I will let Tom take it from here.
Thank you, Lori. Good morning, everyone. Lovely to be here with you this morning. What I've prepared for you guys this morning is an awesome presentation, not death by PowerPoint. My PowerPoint presentations are usually very minimalist. I do have some videos for you that we will play for everyone. And I'm here to kind of tell you why cyber criminals infiltrate computers. And today's session is an introductory session. As Lori said, today's session is the first one of 4 sessions, and we'll have more details about that. So essentially, each session will be completely something different. Before we get into my slides, I would like to play a very, very quick video for you. So let me go ahead and do that, and hopefully everyone can hear the audio.
What's he doing here?
Beats me. Can I help you, sir?
I'm looking for our security.
Yes, sir. Our security is in the network, sir.
This blinky thing is our security?
The security thing is everywhere. The network is, sir.
Let me get this straight. The security is in the blinky thing, and it's in the doohickey next to the blinky thing? This is technical jargon, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Oh, could I get your full name?
Will Steven.
Will Steven. Yeah.
Did you find him? I think him.
Ask him about Jared Leto's hair.
What do you think about Jared Leto's hair?
Did you know about? Wait, why do you ask that?
Because we're looking at your Facebook in this van right here. Do you get to go?
Yes.
Let's do it. Let's ask him a privacy question.
So what we're asking people about is how public they are on social media and what they think about just online privacy in general. Do you consider yourself like a private person?
Yeah, I think so.
She's an actress.
Like if you get like a part on like
Grey's Anatomy.
Grey's Anatomy or something, would you share that?
How did you know?
I don't want to see them like what they ate.
Do you eat grits?
If you grew up eating grits, would you post about that on your Facebook?
I put a picture of grits up once, yes.
Yeah, really?
Yeah.
She went to NYU.
So you moved out here from NYU?
Yeah, from New York.
Do you study genetic diversity?
So what do you study, like genetic diversity?
Yes, that's actually exactly what I said.
Oh, interesting.
She broke her index finger.
I did break my index finger!
So you're into music, right?
Well, you're in a bunch of bands.
He's a guitarist in Planeswalker.
So like when Planeswalker plays shows, you want to bring out your other friends to see this part of your life.
Wait a second. What?
Her dad is Mike and her mom is Gabriella.
Okay, so like you don't want Mike and Gabriella watching your Instagram.
Exactly. How do you know that?
It's very easy to find out like where people live or like just from their social media. Like the fact that you live on.
No, that's creepy though.
It is kind of creepy, isn't it?
Yes.
So like your brother Christian, you mostly look at his Facebook, right?
What?
What about your boy like Andy? He posts too much? Okay, so you wouldn't like connect with your friends like Laura using Facebook.
What?
So, like going back to Alexandria, Virginia.
What the is going on? No, this is really weird. This is weird. This is weird. You guys are weird.
Amazing.
It totally creeps me out.
Say hello to everybody.
That's terrifying. Thank you.
You knew that. Is that? Whatever.
All right, I love playing that video because we live in an age where everyone is posting everything online. And unfortunately, cyber criminals will use that information against you. So a little bit about me. I've been in cybersecurity for about 15 years, ethical / penetration tester I've worked both in the US and Canada, and I've worked with a lot of different types of organizations. As Lori mentioned, I have completed a cybersecurity assessment of their network to help them become a little more secure. And I also teach at the college level. So right now I'm teaching a course at Fanshawe College here in London. And I've done cyber briefings and awareness trainings all over the place for various companies and so on. So the plan is we have 4 sessions scheduled January 29th, April, July, and October. And each session will be about something completely different. So I said today's session is really introductory. I'm going to show you some general information and talk about some general concepts. But in later sessions, we'll get into more detailed information about password management, about artificial intelligence, breaches, scams, some general tips and tricks. So essentially from each session, if you attend all 4, you will have at least a few key takeaways from each session that then you'll be able to use those key concepts to help be more secure, either at work or even at home. And if anybody has any questions at all, by all means, please ask anytime, and I'm always happy to help. So first, I want to start off by asking this question. Why should I care about cybersecurity? Well, the short answer is that cybersecurity or lack thereof affects everyone. Every one of us is affected, whether we like it or not. Unfortunately, last year we had the 5 hospitals in the Windsor area that were hit by a massive ransomware attack, cyber breach. The IT company that they were using called Transform, which by the way was a nonprofit, and it was founded by the 5 hospitals. So essentially they created their own IT group, had very, very lax policies, and essentially didn't really do a very good job in protecting their network. And unfortunately, those 5 hospitals were hit, and a lot of things were affected. Whether you like it or not, employees were affected as well. So this is very typical. Whether we feel that cybersecurity is important or not important, whether you do something about it, unfortunately, in many cases, you have very little recourse and you have almost no control over your personal information that is being shared or stored by online services, hospitals, the businesses that you deal with on a day-to-day basis, the utilities that we deal with, for paying our bills and things like that. When these organizations get hit, or even your employers in many cases, right? Like in this case right here, almost 1,500 employees, their names, their social insurance number, their address, and what do I need to steal your identity? Well, essentially, those are the key pieces of information that I would need in order to steal your identity. So, long story short, whether you like it or not, cybersecurity affects us every single day because there are breaches literally every single day. And like I said, there's really not much that we can do about it. In many cases, afterwards, there is a massive lawsuit. And the lawsuit might be settled, and if we file a claim, we might get potentially $100 back, based on the number of people that are affected. They might potentially give you 1 year of credit history and credit monitoring. But that's pretty much where it ends, right? And many people are affected, unfortunately. So we need to make sure that we stay secure. We need to make sure that what we do as individuals, we don't overly share our information online. We don't overly share our information when it's completely unnecessary. I do have one example for you. Last month, I stayed in Toronto. I had a trade show. As a business owner, I had a trade show in Toronto, and rather than staying at a hotel, I ended up getting an Airbnb. And as part of that process, the owner of the Airbnb asked me to provide him with a copy of my driver's license. Now, in order to get this Airbnb, obviously I had to do that. But the question that I asked myself is, do they need to know my date of birth? And the answer or the conclusion I came to was no. all that he needs to know is he needs to see my photo ID. He needs to confirm my name. He needs to confirm where I live, so potentially my address, but he doesn't necessarily need my driver's license number. He doesn't necessarily need my date of birth. So when I took a photo of my driver's license to provide that to him as proof of my identity, I essentially used, on my phone, that little application where I just basically blurred out my date of birth and my driver's license number. Because if you look at the last few digits of your driver's license number, in many cases, your birth date is in that number. So these are just some of the additional steps that you can potentially take to try to be a little bit safer out there. So in many cases, if someone is asking you to provide, hey, send me your driver's license through email or something, right? Or if you go and buy a brand new car, you might go to a dealership and you might, for example, want to take a car for a drive, and they say, okay, well, if you want to do that, I need to see your driver's license. So at the dealership, what they'll do is they'll take a screenshot, not a screenshot, photocopy, or in some cases they might actually scan your driver's license, and that scan will go to some inbox that they have within that dealership. So my tip for the day is, if you're going to do that, rather than giving them your driver's license, bring a photocopy of your driver's license with you. Give that to them on a temporary basis. Take the car out for a spin. When you're finished driving it, say, could I have my photocopy of my driver's license back again? And then you take that with you, and then you can ask the tough question. I gave that to you. Did you do anything with it? Did you scan it? Did you save it anywhere? Did you photocopy it, right? So those are some of the tough questions that you can always ask to try to make sure that your personal information is always safe. So the total cost of data breach, and I don't want to, again, death by numbers. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but IBM is a huge company, global company. I'm sure most of you have heard of IBM. They publish a cost of a data breach report every single year, and they've done so, I believe, for the last 4 or 5 years. According to their report, the average cost of a data breach, and that could include, the cleanup costs, the costs involved or as a result of any lawsuits, any costs to cover employee credit monitoring, bringing in third-party consultants to help recover from a data breach. This is why, these numbers are so huge. And typically, what we find is that the number has actually been going up since 2018. You notice on the left-hand side, 2018, we started roughly at about $3.8 million on average. Now we're upwards of almost $5 million. And you can see there, Canada is number 6 globally. And for some reason, ours has dropped a little bit since 2023. In terms of the top areas that are typically affected by data breaches, healthcare is always number 1 because it is very critical. And in many cases, hospitals, they stay up 24/7. They may not necessarily have the best security. They may not necessarily have super backups. And because it's such a critical service, in many cases, hospitals will pay the ransom. So that is why it's usually targeted. Financial industry, so that would be banks, credit unions, anything to do with loans, mortgages, anything to do with finance, maybe investments. Those are, again, usually targeted number 2 because they have the money. And in many cases, again, it's one of those services that we kind of can't live without. And typically, what do hackers end up taking? Well, it's usually employee personal information. That really impacts the employer. It could embarrass the employer online. If the hacker says, hey, we've got all of your employees' information, their date of birth, their address, and all the social insurance number, et cetera, we're going to leak all that information online. So that tactic kind of not encourages employers to make sure that they pay the ransom, so that doesn't happen. But of course, you don't have that guarantee that even if you pay the ransomware hackers or the attackers will actually do what they say. They may not actually give you the key to recover your data. They may still leak your information online on the dark web. So again, you have no recourse, and you have really no guarantees that things will be good. In other cases, customer personal information. Maybe if you're a global company, you've got some intellectual property, maybe some secret sauce, that you're working on. So all this type of information is usually collected by the attackers. And when we look at the attack vectors, you'll notice the ones where you see the arrow, the number one or the top 4 or 5 attack vectors always include things like email compromise, phishing attacks, stolen credentials through phishing or other means, social engineering. So I'll talk more about social engineering momentarily, but essentially social engineering is just me asking you to do something on my behalf and pretending to be someone I'm not. So, phishing, sending SMS messaging or texting, calling someone over the phone and pretending to be from Rogers or Bell or whoever. Those are the or examples of social engineering. So as you can see, that those are always the number one ways that they attack most organizations, according to IBM and this report that they published. Now you might be wondering, okay, so how do we reduce this? Is there something that we can do to reduce the impact of that 4.88 average, $1 million cost of a data breach? Well, IBM calculated some numbers, and again, this is according to IBM, that if you perform employee training on a regular basis, you could potentially reduce the total cost of a data breach by an additional roughly $260,000. If you use artificial intelligence tools to try to detect a breach, or help prevent a breach, you might potentially reduce that further by an additional $260,000. Using encryption of very sensitive data, you might reduce that cost by an additional $243,000. So you can see that there are a lot of different things that organizations can do. Individually, these cost savings, are just a drop in the bucket. But for example, if an organization does, right there on that list there, we have maybe 15 items, 15 to 20 items, right? Individually, you might not save a whole lot of money. But what if we do half of those, right? Then automatically you've just saved potentially $1 million or $1.5 million or something like that, right? But again, that is if we are to believe IBM, and their ability to get proper numbers and so on. So you might be wondering why hackers do this. Well, unfortunately, it all comes down to dollars. It's financially motivated. It all comes down to money. And hackers, the cyber criminals, are basically just a bunch of group of people. And then for them, this is a job. There are actual call centers, and I'll show you some videos, not today, but in a future presentation that I'll do for you when we talk about scams and we talk about these scam centers. These individuals, this is their day-to-day job. Their 9 to 5 job. They show up to a call center. They have managers and supervisors just like you, and they do this, on the phone. And the difference between you and them is that their job is to scam people out of money. And how do they do it? Well, they might just basically call people out of the blue. They're not necessarily targeting any specific individual or any specific company, but that can also happen. If a cyber group wants to attack or target a specific organization, then they will build a profile using social media and the information that they can gather from employees, from LinkedIn, from search engines, and from the corporate website, and then potentially perform social engineering by calling the company, by using phishing emails, by sending text messaging, using the dark web and whatever information is available on the dark web about a particular company. So you might be wondering, okay, so how exactly are they building this profile? Well, in many cases, it's not very hard. You can use Google, you can use Bing, you can use a lot of these other the common search engine to find a lot of information about specific individuals. You can use a LinkedIn to figure out who works at what organization. And then at that point, you can search for specific names, and then use, like I said, LinkedIn to find email addresses for specific individuals within the organization. You could use the corporate website. In some cases, then you can use those email addresses that you found to figure out if that email address exists in a breach that has happened in the past. So there is a website called Have I Been Pwned that tracks all the previous data breaches where a username and a password was breached. So you guys can do this today. And by the way, this is a legitimate service. This is not a hacker service or a cyber criminal service. This particular company is a nonprofit, and they're essentially doing this for ordinary individuals. So you can go to this website, Have I Been Pwned, and put in your email address, for your Rogers or your Bell or whatever email address you use, and it will come back and it will tell you if that particular email address has shown up in a previous data breach. And then it will actually tell you which data breach it was. Was it related to Adobe? Was it related to Bell Canada? Was it related to Rogers? Was it related to something else? So then, you can take appropriate steps in changing your password and so on. But more importantly, there are specific search engines that attackers can use to figure out your username for specific services. So for example, on the left-hand side in that screenshot, you see something called check usernames. So I can put in the example, if we continue on with the John Wilson example, I can put in the theoretical username of John Wilson and notice that in eBay or on eBay, a username of John Wilson exists. On Tumblr, a username of John Wilson exists. So these are just these obscure search engines that have been created that attackers can potentially use to try to figure out if you have a profile on these particular services. And then they would essentially use very, very large dictionaries, and then the usernames that they have confirmed that exist on these services, and then perform dictionary attacks until they're successful in logging in. So this is one of these examples where it becomes very crucial that you always ensure that you have a very strong password for every single service that you use, and that you try not to reuse the same password across multiple services, because then it becomes super easy for these attackers to gain access to these services if you reuse the same password. Because essentially, if they gain one, then they'll have access to all these other services. This here is an example of an ad on the dark web that has essentially been posted, and it says, hey, if you're looking to buy, or we're looking to buy compromised networks, and if you have compromised the network, so essentially this is an ad kind of like you would put on Facebook marketplace, but again, this is on a dark web, for the hacking community. And essentially they're saying, hey, we're looking for corporate networks that have previously been compromised, or haven't been worked in USA, in Canada, in Australia, in Great Britain. And if you have these, we're going to pay you money. So if you currently have access to these corporate networks, we're going to pay you money, and it might range from $500 to $1,000 to $100,000 to $50,000, right? And notice at the bottom there, right over here, they say, we do not take networks that someone has already tried to work. So essentially, they're looking for virgin networks that have been compromised but haven't been actually exploited. And that's exactly what these guys are doing. They're trying to exploit these networks. So in many cases, these hacking groups or cyber criminals, they work as loosely affiliated groups. So you might have 3 different departments in these loosely affiliated groups. One of the departments, you might have individuals that specialize in creating phishing kits, that specialize in creating the ransomware software that actually infects your computer. Then you might have individuals that all they do is distribute the software as a service. So essentially, they try to sell the ransomware software, or they try to sell these phishing kits. And then you have individuals that monetize the dollars that they collect. So they might potentially go to a bank and using stolen identities, they might open accounts, and then they will deposit this fraudulent money into these accounts, and then there'll be the money mules that they'll go in and then basically withdraw the money through the ATM, through e-transfer or wire transfer, or whatever the case may be. But the important thing to realize is that, again, these individuals work as a group, but they don't live in the same city. They don't work in the same office. They are globally placed, and they don't know each other aside from working together as this loosely affiliated group. And in many cases, they are a legitimate service. So they create these ransomware software, they create these phishing kits. And for example, you or I, or someone that wants to get into these ransomware game and maybe, become rich very, very quickly, they can go on the dark web. They can buy these ready-to-go phishing kits. They can buy these ready-to-go ransomware kits and essentially do these things. It's just like you buying, Office 365 from Microsoft, or buying virtual desktops or virtual servers from Amazon or from Microsoft, or from these other services. This is the exact same thing. These cyber criminals will buy these services from other cyber criminal groups and essentially use them for their ransomware attack. So you might be wondering, okay, so how do typically these attacks work? Well, I previously mentioned social engineering is a big one. Phishing emails is a big one, right? So essentially, it comes down to social engineering. They might call you on the phone and pretend to be someone they're not. They might send you a bunch of text messages. And I'm sure, each of us has received a bunch of bogus text messages about the CRA refunds and, some deal that is, if you miss this deal, you're going to miss a chance of a lifetime type thing, right? They might leave you a voicemail and pretend to be someone that they're not. Maybe they're from the CRA and they're saying, hey, there's something going on. There's legal proceedings against you from the CRA because you failed to, file some taxes or something like that. In some cases, they might even send you an actual physical letter. And I do have some examples of that, right? But before we get into that, I want to ask you guys a couple of questions. So the first question I have for you is, how difficult do you think it would be for you if I were to ask you to break into an ATM? And I said, I want you to do this during business hours. I'm not talking about you, taking your truck, pulling up to an ATM in the middle of the night, putting some chains around it, and then basically ripping it out and dragging it down the street using your truck. We're talking during the day where everyone's there, during business hours, everyone's looking at you. How difficult do you think it would be for you to potentially do that? Let's say on a scale of 1 to 10. So, 1 being super easy, and then 10 being super hard. So I'd like everyone in the chat window to just put in a number. What do you think? If I asked you to break into an ATM, 1 being super easy and 10 being super hard, what do you think the number would be to break into an ATM? So go ahead and use the chat window and throw some numbers in there. And Lori, if you could just kind of let me know what the average number is, then we'll just kind of move on. So I'll give you guys about 10-15 seconds to do that. And then we'll get Lori to give us the average number, and we'll move on to the next question.
I'm seeing a couple of 10s and a 9, so a couple of 3s. But I think for the most part, it looks like people are scoring high.
Okay, so they're thinking that it's pretty hard. Okay, fantastic. We'll move on. What about a data center? If I asked you to break into the data center, again, during business hours, how difficult do you think that would be? Data centers typically have really good security, physical security. You need swipe cards to get in. Again, same scale, 1 being super easy, 10 being super hard, and this is during business hours.
It looks like we're scoring a lot higher on this one. We're seeing 9, 7, 10,
Okay,
8.
fantastic. What about an office? If I asked you to break into an office and maybe find an empty cubicle or find an empty office, sit down, plug your computer in, and basically start working away and start hacking away at that network. Do you think anyone would walk up to you and say, "Hey, who are you? I've never seen you here before. Are you supposed to be here?" Same scoring. 1 super easy, 10 super hard.
It looks like everybody's thinking this would be a bit easier. We're seeing 3s, 1s.
All right, I like the way people are thinking. Fantastic. So the answer to all 3 of these questions, it may surprise you, then again, we may not. In many cases, as people, we want to be very helpful. We don't want to offend anybody by running up to them and saying, "Hey, who the hell are you? I've never seen you here before. Are you supposed to be here? Let's see some ID," right? So essentially, we always kind of want to be very helpful. And unfortunately, attackers will always use that against you. So I've personally been involved in many physical cyber or many physical breach simulations where we were essentially asked to breach physical security and gain access to places like offices, like data centers, and so on. Now, I've never done an actual ATM, but I do have a video that I'm going to show you related to an ATM. In many cases, attackers might use tools like what you see on screen. So why the Timbits? Why the coffee? Why the banker's box? Well, imagine downtown Toronto, early in the morning, right? 8 o'clock in the morning, 8:30 in the morning. You're in an elevator. You're holding the banker's box. Inside the banker's box, you've got your laptop and all your hacking tools. On top of the box, you have a box of Timbits, you have a tray of coffee, and I guarantee you in that elevator, there's other people, they're just ready to start their day. And there's always conversation related to Timbits. Oh, I'd love a Timbit. And then when we do these in pairs, my partner will always open up the Timbits and share the Timbits in the elevator with the people. So that essentially does one of 2 things. Because we share the Timbits, we are good. We are good individuals. We're awesome. We build a bit of a rapport with these folks so that when they get off on the floor that we want to access, they think, okay, hey, he just gave me a Timbit. They seem like really nice guys. Looks like they have a banker's box full of files or important documents. So when time comes to swipe their card to open that security door, they're going to swipe the card and they're going to open it for us and they're going to hold the door for us because we are carrying these bankers boxes. In other cases, you might be thinking, well, there is an access card that you need, those little swipe cards to open offices and doors. There are devices out there that are capable of cloning these swipe cards. So, in some cases, it might be possible for you at a distance to clone the card and that way get physical access to the location. But let's get back to my question. So the first one is related to the ATM. And this is a video about a group of cyber criminals that essentially broke into an ATM during business hours.
It's brazen. It's in broad daylight in front of hundreds of people.
Take a close look at this ATM attack caught on camera. The image is obtained from the Secret Service. And according to the agency, the guys you see in uniform are criminals grabbing loads of cash. And what left this seasoned investigator stunned?
How normal it looked and how calm they were and how they interacted with some of the store employees while they were actually working.
And that is bang on. When you're doing these things, you want to ensure that you are projecting confidence. As an attacker, as a social engineer attacker, as soon as you start showing nervousness or not projecting that level of confidence, people will pick up on that right away. So you'll notice they had some sort of a uniform, they were in plain sight, they interacted with employees, and that is the exact same thing that we do when we do our physical breach simulations. We talk to employees. We don't hide. We're in plain sight. We interact with employees, and we do the exact same thing. This is a video of when my team and I were essentially trying to gain access to an office. So little backstory here, these elevators that you see here, anyone off the street can essentially use these elevators to get off onto this main lobby area, if you will. And essentially we sat there for a bit, and we saw that there was a data port that was there on the wall in this lobby, and this was public space. So we decided to sit in some chairs that we found. We plugged our laptop into the data port that we found in this lobby. And as we were sitting there, as we connected to their network, as we were hacking their network, employees were walking by, employees were walking off the elevator, and no one at all essentially asked us, hey, who are you? Why are you sitting here in this lobby? And why is your laptop plugged into our data network? So there we are. Notice the secure door behind on the left, and we're plugged into that data port, which is essentially in public space. Anybody off the street, and notice how slowly that door closes. So if we wanted to, we could potentially just go ahead and open that door, walk inside into the non-public space. But again, we're just kind of sitting there, we're doing our thing, and no one is questioning why we're there. And by the way, we did go inside that secure area because that door closed so slowly. Once we were done here, we went inside. There were a bunch of cubicles. We sat in a small meeting room, you know, just to kind of prove that we were there. We took a bunch of photos, took a bunch of video, and we did our thing. So that was the office. Here we're going to talk about the data center. So you see ATCO. ATCO is not the company that we were testing. Essentially, we were pretending to be from ATCO. So how do we get into data center? Well, the data center requires a lot of power. So ATCO is a electrical and energy distribution company out west. So essentially, we went on Amazon, we bought some gear, hard hat, reflective clothing. You know, the clipboard came from Staples. We created a fake employee badge, laminated it. The business card that you see there was professionally printed. All the information that you see on the business card is true, except for the telephone number. So there really was an employee named Brent Stenson. He really was the general manager of operations. The address is correct, but the telephone number is not correct. Well, it is a local number to the Calgary area, but because of the magic of voice over IP, we registered that number. And if you dialed it, it wouldn't dial the Calgary area. It would actually dial a number that it forwarded the call to here in the London area. So one of my accomplices would pick up the phone and would pretend to be from, you know, would pretend to be Brent Stenson. So here we essentially pretended to be from the local electrical company. Hey guys, I need to get into your, you know, power panels. I need to check something, blah, blah, blah. Again, we did this as a team, and essentially we're able to get access to the data center. In other ways, you know, once we get access to a network, once we get access to an office, we might leave a bunch of USB thumb drives on someone's desk. And of course, the USB thumb drive has some nefarious files that as soon as they try to open these files, it essentially attacks their computer. And what kind of files do we leave on there? Where we make them look like it's a Word document, or we make it look like it's an Excel spreadsheet just by changing the icon. And then we might use some really sneaky file names like RRSP contributions or payroll contributions, or, you know, we might put the name of the CEO or CFO on there. And that will essentially entice people to open up the file and so on. In other cases, we might leave a little device. and plug the device into the network. So typically we do this in like a boardroom or a meeting room. So you see that blue cable that's connected to the internal network. Our device will try to exit through the firewall and connect with us through a VPN. If that doesn't work because the company has like really good web filtering, then notice we have a cellular radio adapter connected to our device. So that is our backup way of connecting back to our device. And essentially, once we plug this rogue device into the network, we can then start hacking away. In other cases, attackers might potentially call and maybe leave you a voicemail. So I'm sure you guys have seen the or have heard of the CRA scams, where people were called and said, "Hey, I'm Officer so and so. I'm from the Canada Revenue Agency. Where there's legal proceedings against you. So I'm going to play one of these calls for you." And by the way, on the right-hand side, that is a picture of an actual scam data center where these calls typically originate from. So have a listen to this recording of a CRA scam call.
Hey, this is Officer Sean Carter calling you from the Canada Revenue Agency. There is a tax fraud case registered against you, and your physical property is under investigation due to tax evasion. To know more about the case, I want you to call me on a number that's 613-909-2170. I repeat, the number is 613-909-2170. If you avoid this message, we'll have to start with the legal procedures against you. All I can do is wish you good luck and have a wonderful day. Thank you.
A really nice guy. He wishes us luck, right? And this is typically how the playbook goes, right? They show you something or talk about something. They talk about something that is super urgent, and if you don't follow through, bad things are going to happen to you, right? So they always create this sense of urgency. Again, an example of a text message that maybe you've received about a tax refund coming your way. This is an example of an actual letter that I personally received myself many, many years ago. Apparently I had a really rich uncle in Spain somewhere, and apparently this came from a law office or a lawyer in Spain. And if I respond to this letter, then I will receive 10.8 million euros or US dollars or whatever the value there is. These guys will go to no extent to follow through and create these things. So in many cases, these threat actors, they pose as a colleague, they try to pose as an acquaintance, they try to be your friend. And that's the typical social engineering. So you don't have your guard up. They might pretend to be a client, they might pretend to be a supplier, and that's where these things happen when essentially they try to get you to change your payroll information or your accounts payable information by providing you with a different bank account number where you can pay invoices, and that's how these attackers get paid. So in many cases, the outcome is that companies get scammed, employees get scammed, attackers will get access to the internal network. Because we perform assessments for various organizations and we pretend to be these attackers, we will use the same typical tactics that attackers do. So in many organizations, when it comes to their servers, when it comes to the data that they store on a network server, for example, or maybe in their OneDrive or something like that, right? You might have various folders, and within these folders, you might have HR information. Another folder might contain accounting information. Another folder might contain executive information. So when these attackers gain access to your computer, I guarantee you they're going to look through all of this stuff. They're going to sift through all of your data, and they're not going to perform the ransomware attack until they're ready. So in some cases, they will sit on your network for maybe up to 6 months, and during that time, they're going to sift through all your data looking for super important stuff, personal information, employee information, payroll, HR, tax filings, and so on. If they gain access to your inbox through Microsoft's remote email access, if you use Microsoft 365, They will then search for certain keywords. So here's an example of us. Once we had access to someone's email, we simply searched for the word password. And then, Microsoft 365 showed us a lot of different emails where someone was sharing passwords. So you'll notice on the bottom right, we see that someone was sharing a username and a password through email. So it's very trivial to find access to other systems once you have access to someone's email, because again, people share this type of stuff through email without thinking twice about it, right? These are just some of the examples that we've come across when we do our cyber assessments, where we've come across banking information, Canada revenue filing information, pension information, your accounting. We've come across T4 statements for employees. We've come across records of employment, which of course will include the person's name, the person's address, the person's social insurance number, right? All this really super personal information that then can be used by the attackers to steal people's identities, steal your employees' identities. In here, you also see tax filings and so on. We've also come across scanned birth certificates, scanned passports that people have on their desktops. And that's exactly where we found these ones. You'll notice it's the C drive. It's a backup folder on the C drive of documents. So it's a backup of their documents folder, which was on their local computer. And it was a birth certificate that was scanned for some reason and a passport that was scanned for some reason. In other cases, when we try to crack passwords, this is an example of a tool that we used where we had a total of 90 user passwords and we tried to crack them. And literally within 3 hours, we cracked 50% of those 90 user accounts. So 45 out of 90, we were able to crack in just less than 3 hours. 2 hours and 59 minutes to be exact, just by using an offline dictionary attack. So passwords is something that everyone struggles with. Remembering passwords is always difficult. So you always struggle with weak versus creating strong passwords. Everyone loves short passwords. Everyone thinks the same. If you guys think that the passwords that you've come up with are very unique and no one's come up with the same password globally, I can guarantee you, and I don't want to come across with a big ego or anything like that, but it's just from experience. I've been doing pen testing for the last 15 years, and I can tell you that everyone thinks the same way. You're always going to use maybe a single word with a bunch of numbers at the end and maybe tack on a special character at the end. So things like, winter 2024 exclamation, or spring 2025 exclamation, or, the name of your kid, Michael, their date of birth, 1997, or whatever the case may be. Maybe the name of your dog and, the year you got it or something like that, right? And passwords are always reused. And why are they reused? Because it's difficult to manage multiple passwords across multiple web online presences or accounts and so on. So we might have 2 or 3 passwords that we use with various, techniques for each password. We might change the number. We might increment them a number. We might add an exclamation. We might, do all these typical techniques that people use. I can tell you from experience that attackers, they know these techniques that you guys use to create and share passwords. So when they're doing their password guessing, it's pretty easy for them to guess your passwords. When it comes to data protection, a lot of times data is being shared with no password protection, with no encryption. People will share sensitive information through email. People will store sensitive information on a USB thumb drive, and then sometimes these USB thumb drives get lost, or sometimes they're stolen, and then that data is now gone. People don't, use proper access rules. They don't define data classification. So this comes down to policies within the organization, where you should have policies for public information, a policy for private information and then for restricted information, so that employees know that if data is deemed restricted, then it has to be protected with encryption, has to be protected with a password. And if some piece of data is deemed as public, then you don't need to worry about that protection. So there's this lack of training and education. When it comes to using the cloud, some people also think that, hey, I have OneDrive or I have Dropbox or I have iCloud. That's perfectly fine for my backup. Unfortunately, cloud is not backup. Backups is something that you have that is offline. A backup is something that you have saved onto, maybe a DVD, or you have a portable drive, like a USB connected drive that you create the backup and then you disconnect it and you store that drive offline in some drawer, so that if your computer ever gets ransomware, you still have that hard drive that you've kept in that drawer, and it has all your important information there. So just remember, cloud is not backup, because as soon as an attacker gets access to your computer, they will also have access to your OneDrive. They will also have access to your iCloud and so on. So they will automatically get access to your cloud and whatever you've stored there. So where all this stuff leads is, bank accounts get compromised, ransomware payments, loss of trust, reputation by your employees, loss of trust or reputation by your clients. So that might impact your business. Maybe you'll be unable to make payroll. Maybe your insurance claim will be denied because the insurance company says, okay, well, you know what? You didn't do your due diligence. You didn't do awareness training with your employees. You didn't have a proper firewall. You didn't have proper antivirus on your computer. So because you didn't do your due diligence, we are not honoring our claim. And essentially you are now on the hook, for paying the ransom or paying whatever the cost is, and essentially that could lead to being out of business. So how do we recover? Well, unfortunately, insurance may not pay. So that is not your savior. Insurance will always bring in their own expert. That expert will try to perform forensic analysis, not to help you determine how the attacker got in, but to help you determine if you did all your due diligence and if you are at fault. And if you are at fault, then the insurance company may elect not to pay your cyber insurance claim. Your systems will definitely be down for weeks and months, potentially, while the insurance expert is performing the forensic analysis. Rebuilding your IT systems is very, very slow, and it costs a lot of money because you may have to bring in third-party IT consultants. And when IT consultants know that you are, on the hook because of a ransomware attack, that is where they're going to charge you the the emergency rate, which will then be potentially double what you would normally pay or triple what you would normally pay. And that is why the results of a recovery, or the total dollar cost of recovering your business from a ransomware attack, can balloon up to $4.88 million. So it takes time. And even if you have backups, trying to restore all of your servers, trying to restore all of your data from tape, from other, means, it's slow and it takes a lot of time. And sometimes even if you pay the ransom and the attacker gives you a key to restore and decrypt your computers, you can still never, ever trust that computer, because how do you know that the ransomware group, the cyber group, doesn't have a backdoor to your account, and they can pretty much do the same thing 6 months down the road or a year down the road, and then you'll have to, pay it all over again. So in fact, the city of St. John had a ransomware attack. They elected not to pay, so they had to bring in third-party IT companies to help restore their system, and it ended up costing them $2.95 million to recover their systems, their network, and so on. So it was a lot of money. And in the insurance industry, things are getting so bad that even insurance companies themselves. So this is Zurich, which is one of the largest insurance companies globally. The CEO is essentially saying, hey, cyber attacks may become uninsurable in the future because we are paying so much money in claims that we may elect to no longer insure cyber security or cyber claims. Or if we do, we're going to charge you so much money, or it's going to become so difficult for you to qualify for cyber insurance that you have to jump through so many hoops that unless you qualify, you will essentially not have cyber insurance. So where do we go from here? What's the solution? Legislation, law enforcement. Well, in many cases, I would say that in 90+% cases, you are essentially out of luck. Legislation doesn't help. Law enforcement doesn't help, because as soon as the money leaves Canada, when you send that ransomware payment, or when you do the e-transfer, or when you do the wire transfer, that money is gone and there's no way in hell that you're getting the money back. The only thing that you might potentially have is the ransomware group might potentially get, if you're lucky. Here's a Canadian example where a Canadian ransomware leader, I guess, was found, was caught, and was sentenced to 20 years in U.S. prison. And he was a Canadian, and he was doing the ransomware attacks, and he made over $10 million from doing ransomware attacks against organizations globally. So really, law enforcement, slim chance. So what do you do personally as an employee, as an individual? I highly recommend that you enforce and you enable multi-factor authentication for every single web service that you use, whether it's your email, whether it's Google, whether it's Apple, whether it's, Facebook, whether it's anything that you use online. If they support multi-factor authentication, please, please, please enable it, because I can tell you from experience, when multi-factor authentication is enabled and being enforced, you significantly reduce the risk of that particular service or that particular account getting hacked, and that will stop and help reduce the level of risk. So please do that. Another thing that you can do for things like public Wi-Fi is try not to use it, because public Wi-Fi, there are attack vectors that attackers can do. I can go to a Starbucks, I can connect to the same public Wi-Fi that you are connected to, and I can use some trickery and cause your computer to redirect its internet traffic through my computer. And that way I can potentially see what you are doing on that public Wi-Fi. I can also do the same thing by going maybe to an airport and then spinning up a wireless network with the same name that the airport is using. Maybe it's called public Wi-Fi or free internet or something like that, right? Or free airport Wi-Fi. I can spin up the same internet network, and then I can guarantee you that a lot of people are going to connect to my network, and then I will just, again, see whatever it is that they're doing. So if you're ever at a hotel, same deal. So how do you protect yourself? Well, you can use a VPN connection to your work, or you can use, go out and purchase a VPN connection to a service like Proton, for example. And again, we'll talk more about this at a future session, but I'm just kind of giving you a quick introduction into some of these things. Essentially, maybe tether off your phone. I mean, we all carry a cell phone. So personally, myself, what I do, if I'm traveling, whether it's an airport, whether it's a hotel, what I do is I never use the public Wi-Fi. I always tether to my phone. My data package, I'm lucky enough to have a lot of gigabytes on my data package, so I always use that. So then I know for sure that no one can then attack me. What about the data on portable devices like a USB thumb drive? Again, USB thumb drives can be lost or stolen in your car, or maybe you lose it somewhere, or you leave it behind somewhere by mistake. Well, you can go to Amazon and you can buy a hardware encrypted USB thumb drive that will use a simple PIN. And I guarantee you that these pins, if you use something other than 11111 or 99999 or something like 1234, These are very, very hard to bypass, and these essentially will encrypt any data that you store on these USB thumb drives and make it almost unrecoverable. And by the way, these things use military grade encryption called FIPS encryption. So these are very reasonably priced. You can pick one up on Amazon for about $100. Or a little bit less than that, depending on how much capacity you want. So I highly encourage you to do something like that. When it comes to sharing documents through email or uploading them to cloud services, Microsoft Word and Microsoft Excel have the ability to protect the document with a password. So essentially the document is encrypted, and on the other end, when someone tries to open the document, they will have to provide that password. Otherwise, they are not getting access to the document. The only thing I stress is that the password has to be strong. If you choose a crappy password, a weak password, then of course the risk still exists where someone could potentially try a bunch of different passwords and potentially gain access. And please, 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 if you send the document through email encrypted, please do not send the password through email, because that just negates the whole purpose of segmentation. So if you're going to send someone a document that is password protected, pick up the phone, call them directly, give them the password through, over the phone, or if you have their number, text the password through them. So essentially, you are creating that level of segmentation. How can you help? Well, cybersecurity is a team sport. Read any warning messages that pop up on your screen. I promise you, they are not there to annoy the heck out of you. And I know that they are annoying, but if you see something on screen, maybe take a screenshot, send it to your IT person and say, hey, this just came up on my screen. Can you please help me understand what the problem is? Make sure you have a strong password. Try not to reuse passwords. In a future session, we're going to discuss password managers and how password managers can help you make sure that you have strong passwords and so on. Protect your sensitive data by encrypting it with a password. Don't email sensitive data without password protection, right? Try not to scan your photo ID, credit cards, or other personal information just because someone says, hey, I need this. You have to email it to me, or here, upload to this, using this link, or take a photo and text it to me. No, you're just asking for trouble when you do that, okay? When in doubt, call your IT person, call your support person, ask questions, push back by asking right questions, enforce multi-factor authentication. And if someone is asking you to, hey, go out and buy me some gift cards, or go and, transfer some money to so-and-so, and they're pretending to be your manager, or they're pretending to be one of your other employees, or a CEO or something like that, and says, hey, I can't get to my email right now, but can you do this on my behalf, please? Please, please. That is probably a scam. So again, kind of, stop, take a minute, think about it. Would the person that they're pretending to be actually do this? Is this normal? Before you actually act on something. So when it comes to cyber and protecting our environment, it only takes one person to compromise a network. It only takes one phishing email to compromise a network. It only takes one person to click the wrong link to compromise a network. And potentially, if you open a document that is malicious, it only takes one document to compromise that network. So, it takes years for companies to build their reputation. And unfortunately, hackers and cyber criminals can ruin that in minutes if you're not very careful. And at that point, there's really no recourse. Your clients might look at you differently. You might lose business. You might go out of business. Your employees will treat you differently. And then you're potentially just asking for a lot of trouble. So that is what I've prepared for you guys today. Hopefully I've given you some really, really good takeaways, at least a few that you can utilize within your personal life and work life. Now I'm going to open up the floor to any questions. So Lori, please, I guess just open up the mic and just go ahead and ask some questions, folks.
I just have a question. In recent years, Can you like, is there like a pattern of certain businesses or organizations that seem to be attacked? Because obviously you always see like hospitals or medical clinics being focused on. Is that like the pattern that seems to be going on?
Pretty much, it all comes down to who's got the money and how critical is the service. So one of the reasons why hospitals are targeted is because in many cases, especially in Canada, right, they're publicly funded, meaning potentially the government can provide additional money. And then the service is so critical that a hospital cannot basically be, not functioning for an extended period of time. Now, that is not always the case. Those 5 hospitals in the Windsor area were down for over a week, multiple weeks, and then even certain departments were down for much, much longer than that. I know that, for example, cancer treatments were moved from the Windsor area to other hospitals in the London area and Toronto to try to help out during that period of time. But yeah, it all comes down to who's got the money. So typically, healthcare is number one, finance is number one, investment companies and so on. For whatever reason, the public sector seems to be the last targeted or the lowest targeted, at least according to IBM. Yeah, it really comes down to, I guess, a couple of things. Luck, are they targeting a specific group? Are they targeting just anybody, just kind of like spray and then pray whoever, they happen to catch, or whatever the case may be. So it really varies. It's hard to say.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions, anyone? One question that I sometimes get is related to Mac computers, MacBooks, Mac OS, where people might ask, well, I use a MacBook. Does that mean I don't need antivirus or I don't need to worry about cybersecurity? Because again, Mac or Apple will tell you that we are the best. No, they are not the best. There are viruses and things like that that have been created for the Apple ecosystem. It's just, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, there were not as many people using Mac computers, so that the cyber criminals were not targeting Mac computers. Whereas today, the percentage, of people using Apple computers, I don't remember the exact number, but I think it's around 20 something percent of the total global percentage. So now it starts to make sense for these cyber criminals to target Apple computers. So even though you might have a Mac, I would highly encourage you to go and buy an antivirus program for your Mac. Make sure you follow the same type of tips when it comes to a Mac computer. Make sure you enable encryption of the hard drive. Make sure you use a strong password. Make sure you have your backups and so on. So the same things will apply regardless if you're using a Windows computer or if you're using a Mac computer.
Hey Tom, it's Lori. So I have a question about the dark web. Like I
Mhm.
know you need like a special browser, I guess, to
Yes.
access it, but why can't the dark web just be shut down?
Right. So, well, it's it's really hard to do these things because first of all, these communities use this special browser. It's called a Tor browser, by the way, Tor. You can actually download a Tor browser, and essentially what it does is it bounces your traffic through multiple locations globally. So it tries to obscure your IP address that your internet provider for your house is actually using. See, anything you do on the internet, whether it's Rogers, Bell, or whatever it happens to be, your IP identifies you kind of like your street address of your home, right? So when you're connected to the internet, you have a special IP address that is assigned to your computer. So whatever you do online can be tracked using that IP address. So the Tor browser, what it does is it bounces your traffic through multiple nodes. So it might be like 10, 15, 20 nodes globally before your traffic gets to the endpoint. And then in many cases, these communities, you need to sign up with like a username and password. You might potentially need to know someone before they actually give you an account to use on these marketplaces, right? So in many cases, these marketplaces may not always be open to everybody. You might need to have special privileges, to go and buy drugs or buy firearms or whatever the case may be, right? And unfortunately, for there are as many shady hosting companies for websites and things out there as there are for legitimate uses. So it's kind of like cutting off, the head of a snake, right? You cut one off, and then another snake will just take its place. So law enforcement might shut down a cyber group this week, and then a week later, another cyber group will show up to basically fill the void and essentially do the same thing. Money is a huge modification or it essentially, these people, that's all it's about. It's about money, right? They because they might be living in a third world country or in a country that is outside of the Western world. So to them, earning, let's say $50,000 or $100,000 in a year, that's like us maybe earning $1 million in a year, right? The equivalent of, right? It's a lot of money, and it motivates people to do these things. And that's really what it comes down to. Not everyone is lucky enough to potentially live in the Western world. And I know that, our Western society has a lot of problems, so, socioeconomic problems, but we're lucky enough to be here. Whereas in other parts of the world, in Africa, in the places like Romania and the former Soviet bloc, Russia, Ukraine, and all these other countries where, incomes are much, much lower. If they can earn, like I said, $100,000 or $200,000 or whatever, potentially they could retire on that money. It goes a lot further than it does for us. And because it's done remotely, you don't see the result. You don't feel the result. You don't see people's faces, the suffering, and so on. And because it's done remotely through the internet, again, law enforcement has no reach. If it's done from China, the RCMP can't really do anything. They can reach out to the Chinese police and ask or request them to do something, but doesn't necessarily mean that the police service in Russia or police service in Romania or police service in China or somewhere in Africa will actually do something. In many cases, the police services are just as corrupted as these cyber groups. And that's primarily the reason why it's very difficult to essentially get rid of these guys.
Sorry, I just have a question about kind of the technology or like implements that you could use to hack like systems. What other type of things could you use? Because I've heard of in the past like an alligator server type thing or something like that. I can't remember if that's the exact name, but obviously like similar to what you said is you basically set up a faux internet service at a Starbucks or something, and everyone routes into that network. Are there other kind of like discrete like covert type of technologies people are using that you've seen?
Yeah, absolutely. So in many cases, these cyber groups will try to use custom tools, because when you use custom tools, you have a much better chance of evading antivirus and evading cybersecurity controls. Where if you're using common tools that are readily available from the internet, then chances are that antivirus might pick up on these tools, and then other cybersecurity controls or access control tools might pick up on these things. You don't necessarily need to go out and buy any special hardware. You can, in many cases, use your own, you can create your own tools, you can customize your own tools. You can just use things that come from Windows. So the term And you may have heard this term before, but it's essentially living off the land. So what that means is trying to use whatever tools are available in a typical Windows installation. So once an attacker has access to a Windows computer, then they will use all the same things that come with Windows, typically PowerShell, to execute commands and do all sorts of things without downloading additional tools or downloading additional code or anything of that nature to limit or reduce the risk of being detected and being blocked. So yes, if you're just getting into cybersecurity, you can go out and like maybe go to a website called Hack5 and buy some tools that you know, they sell some hardware tools. For example, it's called the Pineapple. And we have a Pineapple. It's a little device where you can spin up a wireless access point and you can do some wireless attacks, and they have some other hardware gear that you can buy from them. There's also a website called hackerswarehouse.com, I believe, where you can buy some gear there as well, right? But you don't need any of this stuff to get started. All you really need is just, you know, some smarts. You need to understand how Windows works. If on your team you have an individual that is a developer, meaning, you know, he knows how to code some programs, then, you know, put your two heads together and it's pretty easy to do a lot of these things, like I said, using the common tools that Microsoft gives you in the Windows operating system.
Thank you.
You're welcome. YouTube, by the way, is a fantastic resource. So if you're looking to get into cyber, by all means, go on YouTube. There's a lot of videos that will teach you a lot of things about different things, whether it's programming, whether it's you know, protecting networks, whether it's utilizing some of these common attack tools. For example, there is a Linux distribution. Linux is an operating system. There's a Linux distribution called Kali, Kali. That one is dedicated for penetration testing. And it has a lot of the common tools that you can use to kind of get going in the cybersecurity field. And YouTube has a lot of information about Kali and you know, a lot of videos that will show you how to use those tools that are built into Kali. Anybody else? Any other questions? Okay. Well, if anyone thinks of anything, what you could do is potentially forward your question to Lori, and then she'll forward that on to me. I'll do my best to provide you with a detailed answer. Okay. And I hope you can join us for the next session. Like I said, the second session, the third and the fourth session, each will be different. And from now on, we're going to take a deeper dive into all these various things. So the next section that I'm going to talk to you, or I think what we're going to do is we'll take a deep dive into passwords and managing passwords and anything to, you know, related to passwords and all of that. So I hope that you can join us for session number 2. That I believe is coming up in February, I think.
April 23rd.
Oh, April 23rd. Yeah, thank you. So in April.